This courtroom is filled with rising tension. Watch closely, because what happens next leaves everyone shocked. From the judge's reaction to the defendant's unexpected attitude, everything here is real and intense. Let's break down exactly what leads to this explosive moment.
Almost suffocating, because today isn't a regular hearing. Today is the day his entire fate may be rewritten. 11 days ago, on November 7th, everything started with a single mistake. A mistake that Diddy never imagined would ignite a national scandal. Inside Federal Correctional Institution, Fort Dix, a place already suffocating with tension, guards carried out what they thought was just another routine compliance check. A quiet night, dim lights, inmates half asleep. But when an officer paused near Diddy's bunk, he sensed something wrong. A sweet, fermented odor drifting from a towel stuffed tightly under the bed. He lifted the towel, and the room froze. Inside was a plastic bottle wrapped in socks.
Here, everything changes. Notice the defendant's face, the judge's tone, and the sudden silence in the courtroom. This isn't a normal argument. This moment switches the entire direction of the case. The pressure rises, and every eye in the room locks onto the judge's next move.
This is going straight to the judge. Diddy didn't argue. He didn't shout. He didn't plead. He just stared at the floor, shoulders sinking as if he already knew this was a door he could never close again. And before I continue deeper into this unbelievable story, before we walk into the courtroom where Diddy's life is about to be split into before and after, I want you to do one thing for me. Before going deeper into this video, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon. That's how you'll never miss any breaking updates like this. Now let's get back to the story. By the next morning, the prison system was in full alert. Reports were typed, photos were submitted, logs were reviewed, and as soon as one officer's incident report leaked online, the world found out. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, every outlet exploding with one headline: Diddy caught with alcohol in federal prison. News anchors debated it. Fans were stunned. Critics were furious. And a storm of pressure crashed directly into the inbox of one man, Judge Aaron Subramanian. The same judge who, just 6 weeks earlier, sentenced Diddy to 4 years and 2 months. The same judge who oversaw 34 witnesses, 29 days of testimony.
And this is how the courtroom turns upside down. The evidence, the reactions, and the tension all push the judge toward a surprising decision. Moments like these show how unpredictable real cases can be. For more real courtroom breakdowns, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps bring more videos like this.
When Diddy stepped into the transport van that morning, he didn't look like a man preparing for a hearing. He looked like someone being carried toward the edge of a cliff he already knew he couldn't step back from. His wrists were locked in cold steel, his ankles chained, the clinking metal echoing with every small movement. Officers say he didn't speak on the ride, not once. He just stared at the floor, breathing slow, as if replaying November 7th again and again in his mind, trying to understand how one hidden bottle could set his entire world on fire. The drive from Fort Dix to Manhattan was unusually quiet. No music, no chatter, just the hum of the engine and the pressure of what was waiting for him on the other side. Outside, the city moved like any other day, but inside that van, time felt frozen. Suspended in the cold space between who Diddy used to be and who the system now saw him as. By the time the van reached the courthouse, media vans had already choked both sides of the street. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder, microphones raised high, cameras flashing so aggressively that even the marshals flinched. "Emergency hearing," one shouted. "Sentence increase expected," another whispered into a live stream watched by thousands. But the real storm was inside. As Diddy was escorted through the underground tunnel of SDNY, every marshal could feel it. The tension, the weight, the sense that today was not like October 3rd. That day had been controlled, procedural, predictable. Today was something else. Today felt like judgment without limits. And inside courtroom 14B, Judge Aaron Subramanian was already reviewing the file again. The same file he had closed 6 weeks earlier. Photos of the alcohol found on November 7th, statements from officers, behavioral logs, previous warnings. A timeline of Diddy's adjustment struggles. It wasn't just evidence anymore. It was ammunition. As Diddy entered the room, the energy shifted instantly. Reporters leaned forward, pens shaking in their hands. The prosecutor stood still, eyes fixed on the judge. And the defense, Mark Acnifilo, looked like a man preparing for a fight he already feared he could not win. The judge didn't look at Diddy at first. He kept his eyes on the file, flipping each page slowly, methodically, as if weighing the fate of the man standing before him with every turn. The silence felt electric, pulsing across the room. Even the clicking camera stopped, waiting, listening. When the judge finally looked up, Diddy straightened, not because he was confident, but because something inside him realized this moment was far bigger than any punishment he'd ever imagined. The judge didn't need to raise his voice. His tone alone carried the weight of a verdict. He asked the courtroom, "How does a man who stood before this court just weeks ago, who heard every warning, every restriction, every expectation, violate federal prison law so severely, so deliberately?" Diddy didn't speak. His lawyer didn't interrupt. No one moved. Because it was clear to everyone, today wasn't about a bottle. It was about trust broken, rules shattered, and a judge who believed he had been deceived. This hearing wasn't routine. It wasn't procedural. It wasn't just another part of the case. This was personal. This was explosive. This was the moment the system decided to strike back. The prosecutor rose slowly, almost cautiously, as if he understood the gravity of the moment better than anyone else in the room. He carried a single folder in his hand, thin but powerful. And when he placed it on the evidence table, the sound echoed across the courtroom like a gunshot. Every camera zoomed in. Every reporter held their breath. Diddy stared at the table, eyes tightening, because he knew exactly what was inside. The prosecutor opened the folder and lifted the first photograph, the one taken inside Fort Dix on November 7th. A dimly lit image, grainy from the prison camera, but clear enough to expose the truth. A plastic bottle wrapped in 2 gray socks, half filled with a bubbling amber-orange liquid. The room reacted instantly, a ripple of shock, whispers hissing through the benches. Diddy closed his eyes briefly, as if the image itself was a blade cutting deeper. But the prosecutor wasn't done. He lifted the second photograph, the one that always breaks defendants. A close-up shot of the bottle, this time in evidence gloves, its cap swollen from fermentation pressure, small bubbles rising to the top. When he held it up for the judge, even the court officer supervising the exhibit swallowed hard. This wasn't speculation. This wasn't rumor. This was proof. And then came the log report, handwritten notes from the night of November 7th. The officer's statement read aloud. Smell consistent with fermentation detected under inmate Combs' bedding. Object concealed intentionally. Immediate contraband protocol initiated. Every word hit like a hammer. Diddy kept staring at the table, hands clenched so tight his fingertips turned pale. For a man who once lived in mansions, traveled the world, commanded stages, it was surreal to see him standing there, silent, exposed, stripped of every layer of power he used to carry. The prosecutor moved to the next piece of evidence, a printed statement from another inmate. The courtroom leaned in, waiting to hear the exact words that had fueled the judge's fury. The prosecutor read slowly, letting each word settle. I saw Combs take small sips from a wrapped bottle 2 nights before the officers found it. He said it helps him sleep and stay calm. A wave rolled across the room. Gas, murmurs, shifting seats. Judge Subramanian's face didn't change, but the stillness in his expression grew heavier, colder. The defense wanted to object, but even they knew this wasn't the moment. Not yet. The prosecutor continued, revealing the officer's log about Diddy's emotional instability, agitation during count time, difficulty following orders, restless nights. The guard described him as someone clearly struggling, but also someone who knew the rules and still chose to break them. And that's when the prosecutor stepped closer to the bench, lowered his voice, and delivered the line that froze the entire courtroom. Your Honor, this was not desperation. This was defiance. Diddy's chest rose sharply, a deep inhale, the kind someone takes when the world suddenly closes in on them. His lawyer touched his arm gently, signaling him to stay quiet, to hold on, because the storm had only begun. But everyone in that room could feel it. The prosecutor had changed the temperature, changed the tone, changed the entire trajectory of the hearing. This wasn't just about the bottle anymore. This was the moment the court began to view Diddy not as a struggling inmate, but as a deliberate violator of federal law. And the judge, he was listening very, very closely. Mark Agnifilo rose from his seat slowly, like a man stepping into a storm he knew he couldn't escape, but had no choice except to walk straight through. His shoulders were tight, his expression tense, but his eyes carried something the prosecutor's evidence didn't: humanity, desperation. The final thin thread he hoped might pull Diddy back from the edge. He approached the center of the courtroom, palms open, voice steady but layered with urgency. Everyone leaned forward. Even the judge tilted his head slightly, waiting for the defense's last attempt to soften the blow. "Your Honor," Agnifilo began, "we are not here today to excuse a violation. We are here to understand a human being." He gestured toward Diddy, who sat stiff, eyes hollow, face drained of its usual confidence. "This is not the same man who stood before you on October 3rd. Prison changed him faster than any of us expected." The room grew quiet, not sympathetic, but curious. Agnifilo continued, explaining how Diddy had been struggling inside Fort Dix. He talked about the sleepless nights, the panic attacks, the sudden drops in appetite, the emotional collapse triggered by isolation. He described how Diddy went from being a global icon to an inmate battling claustrophobia, anxiety, and fear he never admitted publicly. "He is not defiant," Agnifilo said softly. "He is broken." Some reporters shifted uncomfortably. The prosecutor crossed his arms, but the judge kept his stare locked on the defense attorney, absorbing every word. Agnifilo stepped closer, his voice lowered, almost pleading. "Your Honor, this wasn't a planned act. This wasn't a scheme. This was a man under extreme emotional pressure, trying to cope the wrong way. A mistake, not a rebellion." He argued that the alcohol wasn't part of any operation, nor intended to disrupt prison order. It wasn't sold, it wasn't shared, it wasn't traded. It didn't harm another inmate. It was a private, misguided attempt to calm himself in a moment of despair. But then he did something unexpected, something even Diddy wasn't prepared for. He admitted the violation. "We accept responsibility. We accept consequences. But Your Honor," his voice cracked slightly, "destroying a man's life over this will not bring order. It will only destroy hope." Diddy looked up for the first time since the hearing began. His eyes glistened, his jaw trembled, and for a second, he didn't look like a celebrity. He looked like someone drowning. Agnifilo continued, describing the pressure Diddy faced after his October 3rd sentencing, the fear of years behind bars, the shock of losing control of his life. A man who has spent decades managing pressure now had no tools left. No control, no escape, just four concrete walls and the weight of his own mind. For a moment, the courtroom fell into a muted stillness, the kind that sits between judgment and mercy. And then Agnifilo said the words that made even the prosecutor look over. "This violation is real, Your Honor, but so is his suffering." A single camera shutter clicked. A reporter whispered, "Wow." Diddy looked away, breathing hard, trying to hold himself together. But no matter how strong the emotional pull was, no matter how sincere the plea sounded, the judge's face remained unreadable. And somewhere deep in the tension-filled courtroom, everyone sensed the same chilling truth. This defense, this plea, this emotional display might not be enough to pull Diddy back from what was coming next. The judge didn't speak right away. He didn't even breathe loudly. He simply leaned back in his chair and stared at Diddy with an expression that felt colder than any sentence he could ever deliver. The silence wasn't just tension. It was judgment slowly taking shape, and everyone in the courtroom felt it. Then the judge opened a different folder, one no one had seen yet, a folder filled with details that the public never knew about, until now. He began reading from Diddy's behavioral record inside Fort Dix, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. He spoke about nights where officers logged Diddy pacing for hours, unable to sleep, gripping the edges of his mattress like he was trying to anchor himself to reality. He mentioned the multiple times guards reported Diddy refusing to come out for meals, skipping rec time, avoiding medical check-ins, signs of someone spiraling far beyond normal adjustment struggles. But then came the most damaging part. The judge read out a 3-paragraph internal memo written by the prison's senior correctional officer, a memo drafted after the November 7th discovery, but before the hearing. The memo described Diddy as emotionally unstable, increasingly agitated, verbally dismissive during directives, unpredictable under pressure, and exhibiting behavior that could pose a risk to institutional order. Every sentence felt like another nail being hammered into his fate. A journalist whispered, "This is worse than I thought." Another muttered, "He's done." Agnifilo tried not to react, but even he looked shaken, because this wasn't about the alcohol anymore. This was the judge forming a complete picture, the violation plus the emotional deterioration, plus the ongoing non-compliance. Then the judge read an officer's statement that chilled the entire room. Inmate Combs was warned repeatedly that emotional distress does not excuse misconduct. He acknowledged understanding these warnings. That line hit Diddy hard. He shifted, swallowing, his shoulders sinking deeper, as if the floor was pulling him down. But the judge wasn't finished. He turned to a medical note documenting Diddy's mental state evaluation, one that mentioned he had been struggling to adapt to confinement and showing signs of panic response. And then he said the sentence that froze the defense table. "Mr. Combs, you are not only aware of the rules, you were aware of your instability. That makes this violation even more dangerous." Diddy's breathing grew louder. He blinked rapidly, chest rising and falling with sharp tension. A single tear nearly escaped, but he wiped it quickly, trying not to break completely. The courtroom felt suffocated. Every reporter leaned forward. Every camera tightened its focus, because this was no longer a simple disciplinary hearing. This was the judge building the emotional architecture of a catastrophic ruling. Piece by piece, report by report, log by log, turning a single bottle into a symbol of a man the system now viewed as out of control. And as the judge placed the final paper back into the folder, the message was unmistakable. Diddy wasn't just being judged for what he did on November 7th, but for everything he had become since the day those prison gates closed behind him. Everyone knew the storm was about to hit its peak. The prosecutor stepped forward again, but this time he wasn't holding photos, files, or printed reports. He placed a single object on the evidence table, a digital tablet sealed in a clear protective case. The room shifted. Camera shutters clicked. Even Diddy lifted his eyes, sensing something new, something heavier than everything shown before. The prosecutor tapped the screen, and a short surveillance clip appeared. Grainy, black and white, captured from a hallway camera inside Fort Dix. Not the cell, not the discovery, something different. The video showed a corner of the unit 2 days before the November 7th incident. Diddy walked through the hallway, shoulders hunched, head low. Another inmate approached him, whispered something, and passed a small wrapped object into his hand. It was fast, barely noticeable, but the movement was unmistakable. A quiet exchange, a handoff. There was no audio, but the tension screamed louder than sound ever could. Reporters gasped. The defense stiffened. The judge leaned forward for the first time. And Diddy, his face fell apart. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a slow collapse. His eyes dimming, his jaw tightening, the breath leaving his body in a broken exhale. The prosecutor explained that this clip wasn't proof of alcohol consumption, nor definitive proof of a transaction, but it supported the prison's belief that Diddy was restless, vulnerable, and willing to bend rules inside a system that demanded absolute compliance. It wasn't the bottle, it wasn't the scent, it wasn't the inmate statement, it was the pattern. A pattern that the judge had already started piecing together long before this video ever played. Agnifilo stood up immediately, objecting, arguing that the clip was ambiguous, unclear, possibly taken out of context. A moment of conversation does not mean misconduct, he insisted. It proves nothing. It shows nothing illegal. But the prosecutor countered quietly with a cutting precision that sliced through the room. It shows mindset. The judge didn't interrupt. He didn't nod. He didn't reject either argument. He simply watched the clip again and again and again. Each replay tightened the air in the courtroom like a noose around Diddy's defense. After a long pause, the judge set the tablet aside and looked directly at Diddy. Really looked at him, in a way that made the room feel like the walls had disappeared and only the two of them existed. "Mr. Combs," he said, his voice low but firm, "I gave you a structured sentence on October 3rd, a controlled environment, a chance to stabilize, and instead, within weeks, you became involved in behavior that threatens the order and safety of a federal facility." Diddy's fingers trembled against the defense table. The judge continued, "You had the opportunity and the obligation to comply. But what I see here is not a single mistake. What I see is a trajectory." A reporter whispered into their microphone, "This is bad. This is really bad." Another added, "He's building a narrative for maximum punishment." Diddy's chest rose sharply. The kind of breath that comes when a person realizes the tide has turned so violently they can't swim back. Agnifilo placed a hand on Diddy's back, grounding him, whispering something only meant for him. But even that brief moment of reassurance couldn't compete with the weight falling over the courtroom. Because by now, it was painfully obvious the judge wasn't just listing violations. He was preparing the psychological, moral, and legal foundation for a decision that would change everything. And for the first time since the hearing began, you could feel it. The verdict wasn't just moving toward Diddy, it was charging toward him like a speeding train. Agnifilo knew the room was slipping away from him, and if he didn't act now, the judge's momentum would become unstoppable. He rose again, faster this time, and stepped forward not with documents or evidence, but with something the prosecution had carefully avoided: the human cost of everything happening in that courtroom. "Your Honor," he began, voice steadier than before, "we've talked about rules. We've talked about policy. We've talked about violation. But we haven't talked about what it feels like to fall from the top of the world straight into a concrete cell." The judge watched him closely, expression unreadable. Agnifilo didn't look at the prosecutor. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked directly at Diddy, not as a celebrity, not as a defendant, but as a man whose life was fracturing right in front of him. "When that cell door closes," he said, "everything changes. Suddenly you are not a star, not a businessman, not a father. You're a number, you're a body, you're a schedule. And for some men, especially men who've lived their entire lives with people, noise, movement, silence becomes a kind of torture." Diddy's eyes lowered, jaw tight, emotions trembling at the edges. Agnifilo continued, "Mr. Combs did not walk into that prison trying to break rules. He walked in shocked, lost, disoriented, humiliated. This is a man who didn't just lose freedom, he lost identity." He stepped closer to the bench. "This alcohol violation isn't defiance, Your Honor. It isn't rebellion. It's a collapse. A man cracking under the weight of a reality he was never prepared for." He painted a picture of Diddy struggling with insomnia so severe he couldn't sleep more than 2 hours a night, of panic attacks that left him sweating and shaking in the dark, of nights staring at the ceiling, sobbing quietly so other inmates wouldn't hear. "He made a terrible decision," Agnifilo said, "but decisions made in panic, fear, and emotional decay should not be judged the same as decisions made with malice." There was a shift in the room, not sympathy, but conflict. Reporters glanced at one another, unsure how to process this version of Diddy. Not powerful, not calculated, but shattered. And then Agnifilo delivered the emotional blow that caught even the prosecutor off guard. "He's guilty of being human," he whispered. "He's guilty of breaking under pressure. But if breaking under pressure is a crime worthy of double life, then none of us could survive those walls." Diddy lifted his eyes, glossy, overwhelmed, desperate. For the first time, he looked like he believed someone was fighting for him, not just defending him. Agnifilo turned toward the judge again. Your Honor, you saw this man on October 3rd. You saw the weight he carried. You saw the fear. You saw the remorse. That man is still here. He hasn't disappeared. He hasn't turned into a criminal mastermind. He's just drowning. The judge exhaled slowly, his fingers tapping once against the bench. A sign he was listening, but processing. Agnefiello finished with a line that silenced even the side benches. Don't punish him for falling apart. Help him stand up. The room went still. The cameras didn't move. No one breathed. But even with this powerful plea echoing through the chamber, there was something unmistakable in the judge's eyes. He heard every word, but forgiveness was not in his expression. The judge folded his hands, elbows resting on the bench, and the entire courtroom leaned into the silence that followed. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the kind that builds right before something breaks. The kind that makes your stomach tighten even if you're just watching from the back row. And Diddy felt it more than anyone. He kept his eyes down, but his breathing gave him away. Sharp, uneven, struggling to stay steady. Then in a voice so calm it was terrifying, Judge Subramanian asked a single question. Mr. Combs, do you understand what your actions mean inside a federal institution? Diddy lifted his head slowly, as if the weight was too much. I was scared, he whispered. The courtroom froze. It wasn't a speech, not a defense, just a raw, fractured truth. But the judge's eyes didn't soften. Instead, he leaned forward just enough to make his words feel like they were aimed directly into Diddy's chest. Being scared, he said, does not give you permission to break federal law. He began listing the ripple effects one violation causes inside a prison. How contraband weakens control, how it fuels fights, trades, debts, and violence, how it puts staff at risk, how one bottle is never just one bottle. It is a breach that spreads like fire. And then he said something that made the prosecutor nod and the defense stiffen. It wasn't the alcohol alone, it was the deception that followed. Those words hit Diddy harder than anything else that morning. The judge reminded him of October 3rd, the sentencing, the warnings, the strict boundaries placed on him. You stood in this courtroom, he said, and told me you understood your obligations. You told me you understood the consequences, yet within weeks you violated the very foundation of those agreements. Diddy swallowed hard, eyes burning. The judge lifted the November 7th incident file again, tapping it gently with his finger. This single violation, he said slowly, undoes every ounce of trust this court placed in you. A reporter whispered, "Oh my God." Another murmured, "He's going hard. He's absolutely furious." But the judge wasn't yelling. He didn't need volume. His tone was enough. Cold, controlled, surgical. He asked Diddy why the bottle was hidden, why it was wrapped, why it was placed under socks, why it was kept near his bunk rather than surrendered in fear, why it took officers, not him, to reveal the truth. Diddy didn't answer. He couldn't. Every question cut deeper because the silence itself was the answer. Then the judge turned to the defense. Emotional instability does not erase responsibility. In fact, it increases the concern this court must have. Agnefiello looked down, defeated. The judge continued. A man under emotional distress is unpredictable. A man violating rules under emotional distress is dangerous. This court cannot allow instability to evolve into risk. The room felt like it was shrinking. The judge closed the folder and looked directly at Diddy. No anger, no sympathy, just a clarity that felt devastating. You were given a lawful sentence, he said, and you were given the chance to serve it. Instead, you chose a path that endangers yourself and those around you. Diddy's lips trembled. His hands clasped tightly, his shoulders curled inward, as if bracing for impact. Reporters leaned closer, cameras zoomed, everyone felt it. The judge was no longer building toward a punishment, he was building toward an ending. And as the judge took a long breath, a slow inhale, a heavy pause, a chilling exhale, the courtroom understood that the moment was seconds away. The final blow wasn't just coming, it was about to be delivered. The judge lifted the final page of the file, the paper trembling almost imperceptibly between his fingers. Not from emotion, but from the sheer weight of what he was about to say. The courtroom went silent in a way that didn't feel natural. It felt staged by fate itself, as if the universe paused to watch one man's life collapse in real time. Diddy stared straight ahead, no blinking, no movement, just a hollow, terrified stillness. And then Judge Aaron Subramanian spoke, slowly, precisely, every word sharpened like a blade. Mr. Combs, this court gave you a fair trial. It gave you a measured sentence. It gave you time to adjust, to reflect, to stabilize. He paused. You have shown this court that you cannot be trusted with that opportunity. Diddy's fingers dug into the defense table until his knuckles whitened. The judge continued, his voice echoing through the room. The alcohol found on November 7th was not an accident. It was concealed, protected, maintained. That is not the behavior of a man merely struggling. That is the behavior of a man willfully violating federal correctional rules. A gasp swept across the spectator benches. The prosecutor lowered his gaze. The defense swallowed hard. The marshal straightened, but the judge wasn't done. He shifted forward and spoke with a finality that turned the courtroom cold. Your original sentence of 4 years and 2 months is hereby vacated. Diddy's head jerked upward, not in anger, but in devastation. His eyes widened, lips parting, breath shattering. No, 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 he whispered under his breath, but the judge continued without hesitation. Due to your severe misconduct, emotional volatility, and demonstrated inability to comply with federal prison standards, this court finds it necessary to impose a stronger, permanent consequence. Diddy shook his head, tears welling, chest rising and falling like he couldn't catch a breath. Agnifilo whispered urgently, "Stay calm, stay calm." But Diddy wasn't listening. Then came the line that would redefine his entire existence. Sean Combs, this court sentences you to double life imprisonment. The shock was instant. A woman in the back audibly cried out. Cameras exploded in flashes. Reporters rose from their seats. Someone shouted, "Oh my God!" Another whispered, "This is historic. This is unbelievable." But none of that compared to Diddy's reaction. His entire body crumpled. Not dramatically, not performatively, but like a man whose bones had suddenly forgotten how to hold him upright. He grabbed the edge of the table, gasping, whispering, "Please, please, please, no." Through trembling lips, tears streamed down his face, unchecked, uncontrolled. A marshal stepped closer, instinctively ready to support him. Agnifilo kept saying his name, trying to pull him back, but Diddy was drowning, crushed by a sentence so catastrophic it barely felt real. The judge continued speaking, but Diddy could no longer hear anything. His world had shrunk into a single echoing truth. Double life, double life, double life. The judge concluded with the words that sealed everything. You are remanded to the custody of the federal system immediately. This ruling is final. And then the gavel came down. Once sharp, devastating, like the final heartbeat of a life that no longer existed. Diddy collapsed fully into his chair, shaking, sobbing, gripping his chest like something inside him had broken beyond repair. In that moment, the empire that once ruled music, fashion, television, and business didn't just fall, it shattered.